I work for a company that sells bulk products out of a small warehouse. Some of the items we stock can be quite expensive, so they hired me as a security guard to monitor the place during late hours and most of the night. Being a small warehouse, there isn't much need to patrol constantly. My job mostly consists of sitting in the office and watching live feeds from security cameras. In the 3 years I'd been working there, I hadn't encountered a single incident. No strange visitors, no attempted break-ins, nothing. It was a boring job, and over time, I became complacent. Despite knowing my role required vigilance, the monotonous routine dulled my sense of awareness. That night started like any other. I pulled into the small parking lot around 10 p.m. and parked near the front door, beside the car of the only other employee still in the building. Once inside, I let him know I had arrived. He left shortly after, leaving the building silent except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights. I performed my usual routine, checking all the doors, testing the alarm systems, and ensuring everything was locked. Then, I settled into the office and stared at the security monitors. The feeds showed the same uneventful views. The parking lot, the loading dock, the hallways, and the storage area. After about 30 minutes, my attention wandered, and I started scrolling through my phone, glancing up at the monitors every 30 seconds or so. Nothing ever changed. It was just before 1 a.m. when the system emitted a sharp beep, snapping me out of my scrolling. I froze for a moment, unsure of what had triggered it. I'd only ever heard that sound during the initial tests I performed at the start of each shift. This was the first time I'd encountered a real alert. I checked the system log and saw it was a motion detection alert. A person walking near the building. My heart rate quickened as I searched the feeds, trying to locate the movement. Eventually, I found it. A man walking along the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt met the grass. He wore a thick hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure his face. He was too far from the cameras to make out any details, but something about his presence immediately felt off. Our warehouse was in a remote area, far from any residential neighborhoods or thoroughfares. No one should have been walking around here at this hour. I watched him move toward the end of the parking lot, switching between cameras to track his progress. Suddenly, he stopped and turned his head toward the building, scanning its side with slow, deliberate movements. My stomach tightened. The man stepped onto the pavement and began walking along the building's side, checking each door as he passed. He didn't try to open them, but his behavior was unnerving. When he reached the corner of the building, he disappeared from one camera and reappeared on another, heading toward the front entrance. I leaned closer to the monitors as he approached the main doors. He knocked, the sound echoing faintly through the quiet building. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Slowly, I opened the office door and peeked down the hallway. Through the glare on the glass, I could see him standing outside, trying to peer inside. He knocked again, this time louder. My instincts screamed at me to stay hidden, so I retreated back into the office and pressed the button to activate the outdoor speaker. "This is a private location. You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man looked up at the speaker, his expression unreadable under the shadow of his hood. He seemed like he was about to say something, but then frowned. Instead of leaving, he knocked on the door again, harder this time. A chill ran down my spine. Something about his persistence unsettled me deeply. My gaze shifted to his hands, and I realized one of them was jammed in his hoodie pocket. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I immediately called the police through our security line, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. As I spoke, I glanced back at the hallway and saw the man suddenly pull something from his pocket. He raised it and slammed it against the door. The sound was sharp and metallic, echoing through the building. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see exactly what he was holding, but it was clear he was trying to break the glass. Panicking, I rushed back into the office, locking the heavy door behind me. On the monitors, I watched as he struck the door a few more times. A small crack began to form near the edge of the glass. My pulse was racing, and then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The man turned and bolted, running out of view of the cameras within seconds. When the police arrived, I replayed the footage for them. It was then I saw it clearly. The man had been holding a small gun, using the handle to try to shatter the glass. The officers took my statement and reviewed the footage, but so far, they haven't been able to identify the man. I've spent countless hours replaying the events in my head, wondering what his intentions were. The fact that he didn't care about my presence inside the building is what terrifies me the most. If he had succeeded in breaking the door, I don't know what would have happened next. Perhaps he wanted to rob the warehouse, or maybe his intentions were far worse. Whatever the case, I came far too close to finding out. My house is on the edge of a small town, surrounded by several acres of land. It isn't extremely isolated, but the nearest house is a quarter-mile away, so it's definitely not your regular neighborhood home. I chose to live there for that reason, though. I had lived there alone for almost 6 years when this happened. It was a normal weekend, and I had no plans at all. I spent most of my time watching TV or working outside in the garden. Sometime in the afternoon, I was walking through the house and passed by a window when I saw something odd. There was a person walking through the trees far off in the distance. It was technically my property, and I knew they could see my house from there, but what was most strange was the direction they were walking. They were heading toward the back of my house, which led to nothing but a vast woodsy area. I stood still, watching through the window as they slowly walked past my backyard and kept going until I lost sight of them in the woods. I didn't care so much that they were on the edge of my property, but it was just a weird thing to see, given the location of my house. I went on with my day, looking out the window a few more times to see if they ever came back. But I never saw anything. Later that night, I sat down to watch a movie in my living room. In the middle of the film, I began hearing footsteps, soft, slow steps crunching through the leaves outside. My heart skipped a beat. I got up quietly and looked out a nearby window. I jumped back, my pulse racing. A man was standing just a couple of feet from me. After the initial shock, I poked my head up again. He didn't even seem to notice me. He was still walking slowly, making his way across my yard. It looked like the same person I had seen earlier, but it was hard to say for sure. I watched as he walked all the way to the other side of my property and disappeared into the trees. It was one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen, especially since he had come so close to my house. I stayed up a little later than usual that night, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. I told myself he probably wasn't coming back, but just to be safe, I kept an eye out, ready to call the police if he did. By 11 p.m., I hadn't seen any sign of him, so I felt safe enough to finally get some sleep. I went upstairs and passed out. I don't know exactly what time it was, but I woke up in the middle of the night to that familiar sound. Footsteps right outside my house. My heart hammered in my chest as I quickly got dressed and ran downstairs. The sound stopped. I peered through every window, but I didn't see anyone. I cautiously moved toward the front door, my breath shallow, and looked through the peephole. There he was, the same man. He was standing in my driveway, looking up at my house. It was an eerie sight, like he was plotting something, or maybe just watching, waiting. I grabbed my phone and contacted the police, knowing it would probably take 15 to 20 minutes for them to get here. When I looked out the driveway again, the man was gone. A sense of dread settled in my stomach, but before I could process what was happening, I heard the same footsteps, this time around the side of my house. I froze. I waited quietly, praying he'd just go away. But then, there was a sharp, sudden sound. A loud crack from my backyard, followed by absolute silence. I was shaking, standing there, frozen in place, unable to move or speak. Then, the silence was shattered by another shot ringing through the house. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, 15 minutes, until the police finally arrived. I could hear them yelling outside, demanding the man drop the gun. This went on for a few minutes, but eventually, the police managed to get him to comply. There's no clear answer as to what he was doing. After I told them about what I had seen earlier, him walking back and forth through the woods, it only complicated things further. As far as I know, the man was pleading insanity. He claimed it was a temporary act of insanity, but no one knows for sure if that's true. I find it hard to believe, though. Something about that night, about the way he moved and the way he watched, felt deliberate, like he was waiting for the perfect moment, and I had just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And even now, sometimes when I walk through my house at night, I catch a glimpse of movement in the shadows, or hear a soft, echoing footstep in the distance. But when I look, there's never anyone there. I was house sitting for one of my best friends last year. They had a few lizards and some fish that I had to feed, along with a bunch of houseplants to water. They were on a 2-week-long business trip, so I agreed to take care of everything while they were away. Their house was a lot nicer than my apartment, too, so I was glad to do it. The first week went by and everything was fine. It felt kind of like being in an Airbnb, but a little more comfortable. I settled into the routine of feeding the animals and watering the plants, and everything was peaceful. But then, one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was sitting at the table in the kitchen, enjoying a quiet evening, when I heard a man cough, right outside the house. It scared me because it was so close, just outside the back door. I quickly walked over to the window, my heart racing, and turned on the outdoor lights to show that I was home. The light flickered on, and I waited, staring at the dark yard. I waited for what felt like an eternity, before finally looking out the window. Whoever had been there was gone now. But why had they been there in the first place? I stayed extra cautious for the rest of the night, but there was nothing else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was a little past 7, and I hadn't eaten, so I decided to go outside and pick up some food. As I stepped out the front door, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the yard. The grass was pressed down, and there was a clear path that someone had walked through. I followed the footprints, my breath catching in my throat. They led from the sidewalk to the back of the house, and then they turned around, heading back the way they came. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. It seemed so pointless. Why would someone walk in circles like that? I couldn't come up with any good reason for it, and the thought lingered in my mind as I drove to pick up food. When I returned, I did another quick search of the yard. The footprints were still there, but I couldn't find anything else unusual. I went back inside, trying to push the strange feeling out of my mind. I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV, hoping the noise would calm my nerves. After an hour or so, I was starting to feel sleepy. I turned off the TV and got into bed, checking my phone for a bit before I closed my eyes. That's when I heard it again. Someone walking outside. They were moving slowly, carefully, and I could hear the soft crunch of footsteps through the front yard. I held my breath as I listened, heart pounding in my chest. The steps approached the front door, then circled around to the back. I got up, now fully alert, my body frozen with tension. I heard the sound of the back door shifting, like someone was trying to open it. My stomach twisted in knots. I moved quickly to the top of the stairs and flipped the light switch, turning on the downstairs lights. The footsteps outside stopped immediately. I walked down a few steps and leaned over the railing, peering through the darkness toward the back door. But no one was there anymore, and for some reason that terrified me even more. The feeling of being watched, the sudden disappearance. It was like the person knew exactly what they were doing. Hours passed, and I convinced myself it had all been a figment of my imagination, just a freak coincidence. But then the worst happened. I heard a loud crashing sound from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I froze in place, my heart hammering in my chest. The glass flew across the living room as the window was smashed open. I didn't know what to do. My body moved on instinct. I ran upstairs and into the bedroom, locking the door behind me. The intruder didn't hesitate for a second. I could hear their footsteps, muffled by the carpet, but getting closer. Coughing again, they stepped inside. It was like a switch flipped, and the chaos began. They started tearing everything apart, pushing over furniture, knocking things off the counters, breaking anything within reach. I was frozen, my phone clutched in my hand as I called the police, but I knew they wouldn't make it in time. The intruder was relentless, and every second felt like a lifetime. After a minute of destroying the first floor, the man ran up the steps and into one of the spare bedrooms. The sound of smashing furniture and shattering glass continued. Then, the footsteps grew louder as he made his way toward the bedroom I was hiding in. He tried the door, but I had locked it. The moment he realized it was locked, I could hear him growl in frustration. He started smashing something against the door, hitting it with force. Each hit made the wood splinter, and one of the panels almost flew off completely. The man reached through the broken door and unlocked it from the inside. When he stepped into the room, I could barely breathe. He was wearing a face mask and a hoodie, his face completely obscured. In his hands, he gripped a metal baseball bat, the handle slick with something dark. My eyes filled with tears as I huddled in the corner of the room, trying to make myself as small as possible. But the man didn't acknowledge me. He didn't look at me once. His eyes were cold, focused on the destruction around him. He went straight to the walls and furniture, smashing everything in sight. The rage in his movements was terrifying. He didn't care about me. He just went around me, destroying everything he could, in the most methodical and chilling way. I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. He ran past me and into the next room, continuing his rampage. Then, just as quickly as he had come, he left. He went downstairs and out of the house, disappearing into the night. I stood frozen in the same spot, unable to process what had just happened. I didn't move until I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. The police arrived, but it felt like an eternity before they did. My friends came back early the next day to deal with the situation. They were shocked by what they saw. The house was completely trashed. Furniture broken, windows shattered, everything a mess. But nothing was stolen. The police said it almost certainly had to be someone my friend knew, someone with a vendetta. But when they asked my friend if she could think of anyone who would do something like this, she was at a loss. No one made sense. I tried to give a description of the man, but I couldn't be of much help. He was fully covered. The most terrifying part of the whole ordeal was how the man had just ignored me, confident and unthreatened by my presence. He didn't care that I was there. He didn't care about anything except tearing that house apart. To this day, the man hasn't returned. His motives remain a mystery, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe in that house again.